Hello guys, here Gab again. Today we're going to talk about a little bit about unit of work and DbContext from Entity Frameworks core in microservices. So let's say if you save changes scattered across your code base, you do not control consistency. You are just hoping nothing breaks. So unit of work exists to make persistent consistent, atomic and predictable, especially when one use case touches multiple entities. So let's get some context. What unit of work is? What is? A unit of work is a pattern responsible for coordinating changes and ensuring that multiple operations are persisted as one consistent unit. It defines a transactional boundary. Either everything is saved or nothing is saved. All or nothing. That's the whole point. So we could say how we apply it. How we apply entity framework core with database context. What is the value with this? Okay, so in microservices, entity framework core already implements a unit of work through the DbContext. Okay, let's repeat that because we can work with both patterns at the same time. We we can create a unit of work class that there you have all the operations you need and so on, but Entity Framework Core already implements the pattern through the DbContext, and the unit of work coordinates changes and ensures that multiple operations are persisted as one consistent unit. So the DbContext do that. Okay, it tracks changes, it manages transactions, and executes save changes once. So tracks all the changes made on the entities, manages the transactions, and execute save changes. So let's say we retrieve a series of users or payments or I don't know, payment intentions or whatever. We made changes dynamically in the code, okay, and we are tracking those changes. We can have state A, where the state A is where is the initial state of the all selected entities that we retrieved, and the state B is where is the modified state of the entities. We have this track, okay. When we save it, we are managing the transactions, all or nothing. If one thing fails, we make a rollback, okay. And this separation is important. The application layer does not manage transactions and does not call save changes directly. The responsibility is resolved in infrastructure. So, as we said before in other videos, the application layer orchestrates and coordinates, but knows what must be done. No, not how it must be done. It only operates through abstractions, through interfaces, okay? The implementations are here in the infrastructure layer. So, for example, in a payment flow, we can update multiple entities, and only at the end we commit everything together. Okay, we update all of the entities we need, and at the end we finally commit it. Okay, this ensures that the state is consistent. Either the whole payment operation is applied or none of it is. Okay, so why unit of work matters in microservices, guys? Why is this important? Because it ensures consistency inside the microservice without mixing responsibilities across all layers. Each microservice manages its own transaction, and consistency between services is handled with other mechanisms. Inside the service, transactions between services, different consistency mechanism. This is very, very important because when we are talking about microservice, clean architecture, DDD, and so on, we are talking about a well-specific, defined, and with clarity rule of business. Okay, for example, we can have n microservices that are splitted. For example, a microservice of users, a microservice of payments, a microservice of establishment, a microservice of parameters, and so on. And each microservice has its own database, has its own transaction management, and itself its own DbContext through entity framework core with the unit of work pattern. Okay, so inside each microservice we manage it with transactions, but the communication between the services, the microservices, we do it with other forms. For example, refit, that I explained it in other video. So, talking about what is the real problem that the unit of work resolves with DbContext or else application DbContext. It solves the problem of coordinating multiple changes in the model and persisting them atomically and consistently. Instead of saving changes in a scattered way, unit of work keep tracks of which entities changed, defines when they are persisted, and guarantees everything is committed or rolled back. So, as I said before, we keep track of everything that has been changed from multiple entities, one table, two tables, three tables, I don't know, a lot, a lot. So we keep the track of them. We the unit of work and the DbContext ensures how they are going to be updated, and then it's all or nothing. Okay. This is especially important when a single use case touches more than one entity. For example, we make a payment and we have to update the entity of transactions, the entity of payment intention, the entity of logging, I don't know, a lot. So we have to make sure that every entity is well updated. Okay, so how does the entity framework core fit with the unit of work? Because we already said that they are very similar. The DbContext or application DbContext is like a mechanism for the pattern unit of work. I mean, entity framework core implements DbContext that it's itself a unit of work pattern. Okay, so the DbContext maintains a change tracker. Okay, the DbContext knows which entities are added, modified, or deleted, and executes everything together when SaveChanges is called. So we can do everything. We can have and edit multiple instances of multiple entities, and then only then when we press or do SaveChanges, we apply all the changes. So, for example, all the added elements of the entities, all the modified entities, and all the deleted entities. This the meaning is that we don't need to manually implement a unit of work if we don't want it. Okay, entity framework already does it, but we can implement a class of unit of work to centralize and coordinate all if you want, and then use properly the FCore. So, what's the role as a context? What is the role of the DbContext or else of name application DbContext in our architecture? The application DbContext lives in the infrastructure layer and fulfills two roles. It is the unit of work, and it is the entry point to the database. Okay, the application DbContext, it's like the centralized unit of work to connect, to communicate, and to establish a connection and play with the database. Okay, and here is another key rule: the application layer never accesses DbContext directly. That's because the infrastructure layer knows how is the implementation, knows how to communicate with the database of the microservice. The application layer only knows what must be done, nothing else. The application only knows repositories or else interfaces, the abstractions, nothing more, which internally use the DbContext. Example, repositories sharing one context. The application orchestrates a payment flow by calling multiple repositories. All those repositories share the same DbContext, scoped per request, and the commit happens once. That's what keeps the whole case consistent. So we must, we could ask why the DbContext is scoped, why we use the DbContext as scoped, or why not transient or singleton, for example? Because the DbContext is it represents a unit of work per request. Per request, it avoids concurrency problems and it maintains consistency across repositories. Okay, so for example, we have a petition. I am a user. I make a client request. I want to make a payment. I want to create a user. That is going to be, for example, in the inner work, a transaction. So we need the context of the database, the DbContext of the entity framework core, to be instantiated and lived per request, no globally. For example, I need to have the state per request in that moment and to work with that, okay? And the commit happens once. A singleton DbContext would be dangerous and the transient DbContext would break consistency, okay? Scoped is the sweet spot. One unit of work, one request, okay? Where SaveChanges happens and why? Where do we call SaveChanges and why? SaveChanges is executed once per use case, usually at the end of the handler or from a behavior pipeline if you want centralized commits. We never call SaveChanges inside each repository because that breaks the concept of unit of work. Example, we have a command handler. We perform several operations and only at the end we persist everything. That ensures atomicity. Okay, we do with a handler in the application that knows what must be done. It does a lot of things. It does a lot of things. Okay, several operations, add here, delete there, call external services, and finally, when everything is done, we persist. We save the changes. Okay. So talking about a payoff of performance, the unit of work reduces round trips to the database because we're going to do it once. We are not going to update any single row that we have. We do not establish any multiple connections to the database. If we have a for loop, we are not going to iterate for each loop and update in each row. Do you follow me? So it reduces the round trips to the database. We avoid unnecessary commits and we allow optimization of the transaction, okay? But if we misused like heavy tracking or long-lived context, it can increase the memory usage. This is very, very important. That's why we are careful, as we talk in other videos. We keep the scope small, and we use as node tracking only for reading. Okay, if we read the entities, if we only have to read data, we are going to use as node tracking, because we are not we do not want to track the entities. We just only want to read, and so on. So the unit of work gives consistency and performance, but only if we keep the context disciplined. So a summary for all of us. Unit of work is all or nothing, okay? It's a centralized component that we have. The entity framework core has a class like DbContext, or else we can name it ApplicationDbContext, but it is DbContext. It acts like, or else it is a unit of work, okay? DbContext is our unit of work. We do not call SaveChanges inside repositories. DbContext must be scoped, not transient or singleton, and that's it. Thank you so much. I hope this video clarifies something about the use of unit of work, unit entity framework core with DbContext, and gives a thumbs up, and thank you so much.